of confidence which I had written many years previously. "It must have been the hand of fate," he continued, "that slipped this book into my pocket yesterday afternoon, because I was about ready to go out there and punch a hole in Lake Michigan. I had about come to the conclusion that everything and everybody, including God, had it in for me, until I read this book, and it gave me a new viewpoint and brought me the courage and the hope that sustained me through the night. I made up my mind that if I could see the man who wrote this book, he could help me get on my feet again. Now I am here, and I would like to know what you can do for a man like me." While he was speaking, I'd been studying him from head to foot, and I am frank to admit that down deep in my heart I did not believe there was anything I could do for him, but I did not wish to tell him so. The glassy stare in his eyes, the lines of discouragement in his face, the posture of his body, the 10 days' growth of beard on his face, the nervous manner about this man, all conveyed to me the impression that he was hopeless. But I did not have the heart to tell him so. Therefore I asked him to sit down and tell me his whole story. I asked him to be perfectly frank and tell me as nearly as possible just what had brought him down to the ragged edge of life. I promised him that after I had heard his entire story, I would then tell him whether or not I could be of service to him. He related his story in lengthy detail, the sum and substance of which was this. He had invested his entire fortune in a small manufacturing business. When the World War began in 1914, it was impossible for him to get the raw materials necessary in the operation of his factory, and he therefore failed. The loss of his money broke his heart and so disturbed his mind that he left his wife and children and became a tramp. He had actually brooded over his loss until he had reached the point at which he was contemplating suicide. After he had finished his story, I said to him, "I have listened to you with a great deal of interest, and I wish that there was something which I could do to help you, but there is absolutely nothing." He became as pale as he will be when he is laid away in a coffin, and settled back in his chair and dropped his chin on his chest, as much as to say, "That settles it." I waited for a few seconds, then I said, "While there is nothing that I can do for you, there is a man in this building to whom I will introduce you, if you wish, who can help you regain your lost fortune and put you back on your feet again." These words had barely fallen from my lips when he jumped up, grabbed me by the hands, and said, "For God's sake, lead me to this man." It was encouraging to note that he had asked this "for God's sake." This indicated that there was still a spark of hope within his breast. So I took him by the arm and led him out into the laboratory where my psychological tests in character analysis were conducted, and stood with him in front of what looked to be a curtain over a door. I pulled the curtain aside and uncovered a tall looking-glass in which he saw himself from head to foot. Pointing my finger at the glass, I said, "There stands the man to whom I promised to introduce you. There is the only man in this world who can put you back on your feet again, and unless you sit down and become acquainted with that man as you never became acquainted with him before, you might just as well go on over and punch a hole in Lake Michigan, because you will be of no value to yourself or to the world until you know this man better." He stepped over to the glass, rubbed his hands over his bearded face, studied himself from head to foot for a few moments, then stepped back, dropped his head, and began to weep. I knew that the lesson had been driven home, so I led him back to the elevator and sent him away. I never expected to see him again, and I doubted that the lesson would be sufficient to help him regain his place in the world, because he seemed to be too far gone for redemption. He seemed to be not only down, but almost out. A few days later, I met this man on the street. His transformation had been so complete that I hardly recognized him. He was walking briskly, with his head tilted back. That old shifting, nervous posture of his body was gone. He was dressed in new clothes from head to foot. He looked prosperous, and he felt prosperous. He stopped me and related what had happened to bring about his rapid transformation from a state of abject failure to one of hope and promise. "I was just on my way to your office," he explained, "to bring you the good news. I went out the very day that I was in your office, a down-and-out tramp. And despite my appearance, I sold myself at a salary of $3,000 a year. Think of it, man, $3,000 a year. And my employer advanced me money enough with which to buy some new clothes, as you can see for yourself. He also advanced me some money to send home to my family, and I am once more on the road to success. It seems like a dream when I think that only a few days ago I had lost hope and faith and courage, and was actually contemplating suicide. I was coming to tell you that one of these days, when you are least expecting me, I will pay you another visit, and when I do, I will be a successful man. I will bring with me a check, signed in blank and made payable to you, and you may fill in the amount, because you have saved me from myself by introducing me to myself. That self which I never knew until you stood me in front of that looking-glass and pointed out the real me. As that man turned and departed in the crowded streets of Chicago, I saw for the first time in my life what strength and power and possibility lie hidden in the mind of the man who has never discovered the value of self-reliance. Then and there I made up my mind that I too would stand in front of that same looking-glass and point an accusing finger at myself for not having discovered the lesson which I had helped another to learn. I did stand before that same looking-glass, and as I did so, I then and there fixed in my mind, as my definite purpose in life, the determination to help men and women discover the forces that lie sleeping within them. The book you hold in your hands is evidence that my definite purpose is being carried out. The man whose story I have related is now the president of one of the largest and most successful concerns of its kind in America, with a business that extends from coast to coast and from Canada to Mexico. A short while after the incident just related, a woman came to my office for personal analysis. She was then a teacher in the Chicago public schools. I gave her an analysis chart and asked her to fill it out. She had been at work on the chart but a few minutes when she came back to my desk, handed me back the chart, and said, "I do not believe I will fill this out." I asked her why she had decided not to fill out the chart, and she replied, "To be perfectly frank with you, one of the questions in this chart put me to thinking, and I now know what is wrong with me. Therefore, I feel it unnecessary to pay you a fee to analyze me." With that, the woman went away, and I did not hear from her for 2 years. She went to New York City, became a writer of advertising copy for one of the largest agencies in the country, and her income at the time she wrote me was $10,000 a year. This woman sent me a check to cover the cost of my analysis fee because she felt that the fee had been earned, even though I did not render her the service that I usually render my clients. It is impossible for anyone to foretell what seemingly insignificant incident may lead to an important turning point in one's career, but there is no denying the fact that these turning points may be more readily recognized by those who have well-rounded out confidence in themselves. One of the irreparable losses to the human race lies in the lack of knowledge that there is a definite method through which self-confidence can be developed in any person of average intelligence. What an immeasurable loss to civilization that young men and women are not taught this known method of developing self-confidence before they complete their schooling, for no one who lacks faith in himself is really educated in the proper sense of the term. Oh, what glory and satisfaction would be the happy heritage of the man or woman who could pull aside the curtain of fear that hangs over the human race and shuts out the sunlight of understanding that self-confidence brings wherever it is in evidence. Where fear controls, noteworthy achievement becomes an impossibility, a fact which brings to mind the definition of fear as stated by a great philosopher. Fear is the dungeon of the mind into which it runs and hides and seeks seclusion. Fear brings on superstition, and superstition is the dagger with which hypocrisy assassinates the soul. In front of the typewriter on which I am writing the manuscripts for this reading course hangs a sign with the following wording in big letters: "Day by day, in every way, I'm becoming more successful." A skeptic who read that sign asked if I really believed that stuff, and I replied, of course not. All it ever did for me was to help me get out of the coal mines where I started as a laborer, and find a place in the world in which I am serving upwards of 100,000 people, in whose minds I am planting the same positive thought that this sign brings out. Therefore, why should I believe in it? As this man started to leave, he said, "Well, perhaps there is something to this sort of philosophy.